I'm going to remarry your sister who inherited the whole fortune. Poor people should just disappear.
My husband sneered as he told me this. Standing next to him was my sister, blatantly leaning on him.
Big sis, you must feel miserable to have both the inheritance and your husband taken away by me. Well, stealing your stuff feels so great. We're going to live happily with my dad's inheritance from now on.
My sister said with a euphoric look.
You're such an idiot to renounce such a huge inheritance. What a foolish woman.
I felt a boiling anger inside me as my husband and sister mocked me. Are these two even human? Their greed-blinded figures appeared to me not as humans, but as monsters. Indeed, I had renounced my recently deceased wealthy dad's inheritance. My husband instantly abandoned me and switched to my sister, who had inherited the entire amount. I sighed deeply and then told them, "Fine, let's get a divorce."
Wow, you are surprisingly obedient. I thought you'd cling and beg not to divorce.
My husband responded so, but I felt no affection towards him. There was no way I'd say not to divorce. I signed the divorce papers he brought and handed them to him.
Now I can divorce. I'm going to start a new life as a wealthy man.
Thanks, big sis. A divorced, unimpressive woman like you probably can't remarry, but cheer up.
They both burst into laughter. Thus, our divorce was finalized, and 3 months later, I received a frantic call from my ex-husband. I smiled faintly as I looked at his numerous missed calls. You've realized it now. Too late. My name is Nancy. I'm 35 years old. My ex-husband, Bob, who is 3 years older than me, and I got married 10 years ago, and we've been a working couple. We have a son who is 8 years old. His name is James. James was a spoiled boy when he was little, but nowadays he is less spoiled, and now he is becoming independent. Bob helped with childcare for about a year after James was born. At that time, he was actively helping me raise James. However, as James passed 1 year old, Bob gradually became uncooperative, doing nothing at all. James frequently cried at night, even after he was a year old.
Shut up. Why does he keep crying at night? Is something wrong with him?
Bob yelled, fed up. Don't say such terrible things. It's common for kids to have night cries until about 1.5 years. Don't call your own child weird. I retorted, angered by Bob's harsh words.
Whatever. I can't find him cute anymore. If only he didn't cry at night. I could have loved him, but he just keeps on crying. It's annoying, so make him stop. It's affecting my work tomorrow.
Bob seemed to be enduring James's night crying. His lack of cooperation in childcare seemed largely due to this. In order to put James to sleep, I desperately rocked him in my arms and sometimes took him for a drive in the car. Bob always looked at me with exasperation as I struggled alone.
You know, looking at you pisses me off. It looks like you're showing off your hard work raising a child by yourself. It's annoying.
Although I sometimes stood up to such verbal abuse, the frequent arguments were a burden, so I often remained silent. Even after that, I continued to handle childcare and housework alone desperately, and when James turned 2, I put him in daycare and returned to work. Even after my return to work, Bob did not help with housework or childcare, so I led a hectic life of solo parenting. Whenever I asked for help, he would say, "I'm too tired," and just relax on the sofa. I knew it would be better to rely on others, but I did not turn to my parents. My mom had died when I was young, and since my dad was elderly, I did not want to burden him. I have only one sister, but we have never gotten along. Rather, it's more like she has unilaterally disliked me. Her name is Sophia, and she's 3 years younger than me, so she is now 32 years old. Sophia has always been the kind of person who couldn't stand not being the center of attention since she was little. She particularly despised it whenever I was given priority. There's one incident with Sophia that I distinctly remember. It happened on the day our dad bought me a new dress. Because my favorite one was getting worn out from so much wear. It was a summer dress with a sunflower pattern. I was so happy that I thanked my dad over and over, and he was grinning from ear to ear. However, our happy moment was quickly ruined by Sophia. She came running from another room where she had been playing alone and screamed at us.
"What's with that dress? Why did you only buy Nancy a dress? I didn't get one. That's not fair."
"What are you talking about, Sophia? You just got a new sweater and skirt recently."
I responded that, but Sophia wasn't having any of it. She clung to our dad, crying,
"Buy me a dress, Dad, please. It's not fair that only Nancy gets a new one. I want it too."
Despite my dad's attempts to calm her, Sophia kept on crying and wailing. Reluctantly, he ended up buying her a dress. Sophia always envied me, yet it wasn't true that I was treated any more special than she was. Nevertheless, she often played the "it's not fair" and frequently made things difficult for adults around us. When we were kids, the adults often indulged her just because she was the younger one. As we grew up, they told her to bear it more often, but Sophia would twist their words to get her way anyway. Furthermore, she often belittled me, boasting that she was more loved by everyone around her. Each time, I would calmly reprimand such behavior from Sophia, which she hated. Sophia grew up to be a selfish adult and moved out as soon as she went to college. Now, she doesn't have a stable job and lives off money from various people. She's not married yet. I haven't been in touch with Sophia for years, so it seems we'll continue to live our lives without much interaction. The last time I saw Sophia was at my wedding. Sophia showed up in a white dress that was so flashy it almost overshadowed me. How did she choose the white dress? She must have been against me. She sneered at me in my wedding gown.
Doesn't suit you at all. By the way, doesn't your face look swollen? Did you even go to a bridal spa?
I'll never forget her face that day. Throughout the reception, she drank wine excessively and got drunk, bothering several men. Since that day, I haven't seen Sophia. I know her contact info, but there's really no need to reach out to her since we don't need to talk. It appears she doesn't return our parents' home either. Bob and I have considered divorce a few times. But even with a father like him, he's the only one James has. It's been hard to make that final decision to divorce. Then one day, I got a call that my dad had suddenly fallen ill and was rushed to the hospital. I was at work, so I explained the situation to my boss and hurried to the hospital. I tried to contact Sophia but couldn't reach her, so I sent an email. After a while, I received a response from her.
Dad's about to die. Well, he's old. I have a date today, so I can't come to the hospital. Let me know the time and place of the funeral when it's set.
It's unbelievable that she would say such a thing when it's not even confirmed that he's going to die. To prioritize a date over her own dad is just incredible. I was stunned by Sophia's lack of common sense. Meanwhile, Bob arrived at the hospital.
How's your dad's condition?
Bob seemed to have rushed over and was panting heavily. It looks really serious. Bob, you're worried about Dad, aren't you? Thank you. Honestly, I was surprised that Bob was so concerned about Dad. While my dad and Bob weren't on bad terms, they hadn't been particularly close either. In the end, my dad passed away. Sophia didn't show up at the hospital, so it was just Bob and me who saw him off. Dad. I clung to Dad's lifeless body and cried, while Bob cried exaggeratedly next to me. It almost looked unnatural. After that, Bob helped with my dad's funeral arrangements, and we informed Sophia of the time and place. 4 days after Dad died, we held the funeral, and Sophia appeared with a big smile on her face.
Hey Nancy, long time no see. Let's talk about the inheritance soon, shall we?
Her voice was so cheery. The truth was, my dad was wealthy. Since our mom had died when we were young, my sister and I were his only heirs. I told Sophia calmly, "Today is Dad's funeral. Let's talk about the inheritance another day." Sophia looked dissatisfied, but I ignored her and went around greeting the people who had come to the funeral. That night, after putting James to bed, I told Bob, "I've decided to renounce the inheritance." Bob then exclaimed in astonishment,
What? Are you serious?
"Keep your voice down. You'll wake James. I've thought this through, and I've decided to give up the inheritance." Bob slammed into me like he was covering my words.
Why would you renounce the inheritance? Don't be ridiculous. Your dad had a huge fortune, right? It's stupid not to take it.
Calm down. We can't even have a proper discussion if you're like this. Bob was furious, almost like a raging fire.
How can I stay calm? I will never accept you renouncing the inheritance. Don't say such ridiculous things. You're such an idiot.
Bob's face turned red with anger, and a suspicion crossed my mind. Had Bob been after Dad's inheritance all along? Considering this, I asked him directly, "Bob, were you aiming for Dad's inheritance? Was all that crying when Dad died just an act?" Then Bob sneered and said mockingly,
Yeah, that's right. Well, maybe more like tears of joy. When I thought about your dad finally dying, I was so happy. I thought I'd become rich now.
I felt a sense of anger and disappointment so profound it was as if darkness had fallen before me. How could he say such terrible things so calmly? To me, the man in front of me seemed not human, but a monster. "I see, but no matter what you say, I'm renouncing the inheritance," I said quietly, and Bob yelled.
You're really a fool.
However, my resolve did not waver. Later, I informed Sophia that I was renouncing the inheritance, and it was decided that she would inherit everything from Dad. Once it was official that Sophia would inherit all, Bob showed no interest in me anymore. He no longer talked with James and came home later and later. Eventually, he stopped coming home altogether.
What's happened to Dad?
Dad's just really busy with work, James. You don't need to worry about anything. I often reassured a worried James. After a while, I got a text from Bob saying, "We need to talk tonight," so I decided to have a neighbor look after James. Somehow, I felt it wasn't right for James to be there. That night, Bob came home with someone.
Hello.
I recognized that voice.
Hey, Nancy. I'm sorry to disturb you so suddenly.
Yes, the person who came home with Bob was my sister Sophia. The moment I saw Bob's smirking face, I had a pretty good idea what was coming. We sat down at the table, and Bob started speaking with gusto.
Well, I'm going to divorce Nancy and marry Sophia.
Wow, is that because Sophia is inheriting all of Dad's estate? Bob burst out laughing.
If you knew, why did you renounce the inheritance? You're really stupid. If you had just accepted the inheritance, none of this would have happened.
When I remained silent, Bob kept on insulting me.
Not only are you stupid enough to renounce the inheritance, but you're not much to look at either. Sophia is way cuter. I was surprised how beautiful she has become when I saw her at your dad's funeral after such a long time. I just had to divorce you and be with Sophia.
It seems Bob had made his move on Sophia.
Sis, you must be miserable having both the inheritance and your husband stolen by me. It feels so good to take your things. I'm going to live happily ever after with your share.
Sophia said with a blissful expression.
So, I'm going to remarry Sophia, who inherited all of your dad's estate. Someone like you, a poor person, should just disappear.
Bob said, laughing loudly with Sophia. I sighed heavily and then told them, "Okay, Bob, let's get divorced."
Wow, you are surprisingly obedient. I thought you'd cling and beg not to divorce.
Bob said, surprised. I had no love left for Bob. There was no way I would say not to divorce. This man has quite a misunderstanding. However, I'm taking custody of James. I stated so. Bob muttered as if he had forgotten.
Of course, having a child around would just be a bother for the luxurious new life I'm starting with Sophia. In fact, I had forgotten about James until just now.
What a despicable man. It was truly a blessing that James wasn't here to hear this. Just the thought of him hearing such words sent chills down my spine. I managed to hold back my anger and calmly informed Bob. I will be seeking alimony and child support through a lawyer later on.
What? If you wanted money, why did you renounce the inheritance?
Bob laughed mockingly.
Sis, you really make no sense.
Sophia chuckled, leaning on Bob.
Well, I'll throw a few 10,000 your way. After all, we're about to inherit your dad's massive fortune soon.
Don't forget what you just said. So, have you brought the divorce papers?
Right.
Bob pulled the divorce papers from his bag.
I filled out my part, so just sign your part quickly.
Understood. I signed my section and handed it back to Bob.
All right, this means we can get divorced.
Thanks, Nancy, but you know, with your plain looks and being 35 and divorced, I doubt you'll remarry.
Exactly. Just like Sophia said. Your life is going to be hell from here on, you miserable old woman.
Facing the laughing duo, I stood firm and said, "Our conversation is over. I'm going to pick up James now. Can you two make sure not to come back to the house until I've moved out?" I said this and left to pick up James from a friend's house. When James saw me, he jumped into my arms with a big smile, shouting, "Mom!" His cuteness almost made me cry, compounded by the stress from earlier. I thanked my friend and handed her the sweets I had bought in advance from the department store. She seemed to sense that something serious had happened as she looked at me with concern.
"Nancy, you look pale. Are you okay? Remember, you can always rely on me if something's up."
Her kindness almost brought me to tears again. After thanking her multiple times, James and I left her house. Holding hands, we walked through the night streets. James hummed a tune, happily swinging my hand as we walked. Tears welled up in my eyes, maybe from the emotional upheaval. I shouldn't be crying. After all, I have no reason to cry. It's not me, but those two who should be facing hell. I decided this would be the last time I would cry. From now on, it would be just James and me stepping into a happy life. When we got home, Bob and Sophia were already gone. Soon after, I started looking for a new place and went to a real estate agency with a property in mind that I had found online. Fortunately, I found a suitable place within James's school district. I didn't want to change James' environment, so I was looking for it in the same area. Having arranged everything for the move, James and I left the house. Later, through my lawyer, I filed for child support and alimony from Bob. I also filed for alimony from Sophia, but perhaps emboldened by their inheritance, both of them paid the full amount requested at once. I used that money to establish a stable life for James and me. James seemed to really like our new home and accepted the divorce smoothly.
"All I need is Mom with me."
He said with a smile. Bob had only taken care of James until he was 1 year old, and since then, their interaction had been minimal. My declaration of renouncing the inheritance made Bob even more indifferent, so maybe James felt it didn't matter whether he had a father. I vowed to make James even happier than before. Fortunately, I had a job and the alimony and child support from Bob and Sophia, so I wasn't worried about our finances. James and I started enjoying a peaceful and fun life. 3 months after the divorce, Bob suddenly called. However, I was at work and had put my smartphone in my bag, so I didn't notice his call. When I checked my phone after work, I saw several missed calls from Bob. There was also a voicemail sounding desperate, saying,
"Call me back urgently."
I chuckled to myself. He finally realized it. Without returning the call, I put my phone back in my bag and headed home. On the train, Bob kept calling, annoying me, so I turned off my phone. After picking up James from the after-school care, we went home and had dinner together. By then, I had completely forgotten about Bob's calls. Over dinner, James happily talked about his day at school. I loved listening to his stories more than anything. After cleaning up from dinner, I remembered I had turned off my phone. When I turned it back on, Bob immediately called again. I thought about ignoring it, but decided to answer out of curiosity to see how they were doing. Fortunately, James was in another room doing his homework, so he wouldn't hear the conversation. "Hello."
"Hey, I've been calling you multiple times. I even left a voicemail. Why haven't you answered until now?
Bob sounded furious, his voice almost breaking from his loudness. Calm down. Let's talk more calmly. What do you want? I already had a good idea of what he wanted, but I feigned ignorance.
You tricked us, didn't you? You knew about the huge debt your dad had, didn't you?
As expected, that's what Bob brought up, and I couldn't help but let out a smile.
Why are you laughing? You knew, didn't you? That's why you renounced the inheritance, right?
Yes, indeed, my dad had more debts than assets. He had fallen victim to a real estate investment scam presented by a longtime friend. And he trusted it without doubt, accruing significant debt. When inheriting Dad's estate, it naturally meant inheriting his debts too. That's why I renounced it. Yes, I knew about his debt, but saying I tricked you sounds so harsh.
Exactly. You did trick us. You didn't say a word about the debt to me or Sophia.
Bob was raging so much, I thought his veins might burst. When I told you I was renouncing Dad's inheritance, I tried to explain about the debt too, but you just yelled at me, refusing to listen to anything. I told him calmly, contrasting Bob's fury.
What? Don't make this sound like it's my fault.
Thinking about it, it's definitely your fault. Bob kept ranting and raving. However, after a while, he said smugly, as if looking down on me.
But you know what? Things won't go as you planned. You wanted us to suffer, but we'll renounce the inheritance too. Glad we caught on early.
What? I couldn't help but let out a dumbfounded response to Bob's grand misunderstanding.
Now what? We're renouncing the inheritance too.
That's not possible.
What are you talking about?
This time, it was Bob's turn to sound confused. It's been 3 months since you inherited. You can't renounce it now. Even if it hadn't been 3 months, you've already touched the estate, so you couldn't renounce it anyway.
No, that can't be true.
Bob's voice was trembling. It's not a lie. You can easily find this out. Tell Sophia that you can't renounce the inheritance anymore.
No, it's a lie. If we can't renounce the inheritance, what will happen to us? We'll be drowned in debt.
That's true, but it's no longer my concern, so I'm going to hang up now. I told him and ended the call. As expected, Bob and Sophia ended up burdened with a huge debt and had to struggle to make payments. 3 months later, today being a weekend, James and I were making lots of pancakes with various toppings for a bit of a luxurious breakfast. Then my phone rang. It was Sophia calling. I considered ignoring it, but figured she would probably just keep calling, so I decided to answer. However, I didn't want James to overhear the conversation. To avoid that, I told James, "James, Mom's going to take a call. Keep eating, okay?" I moved to another room and then answered the call.
Big sis, help me.
Sophia blurted out immediately. Even though she said that, there was no way I was going to help Sophia. But first, I decided to ask about her current situation. What happened?
Bob is terrible. He's trying to escape only himself. I told him I didn't want to, but he's going to divorce me. What a horrible man he is.
According to Sophia, it seems that she and Bob are currently in the middle of divorce mediation. It appeared that Bob was trying to escape the debt by divorcing Sophia, since the debt came from the inherited estate.
Terrible, right? I never thought Bob would be such a person, just abandoning me so easily.
No, he clearly said he married you for the inherited estate. You knew from the start he was the worst, didn't you? You married him just to look down on me. When I calmly pointed this out, Sophia shouted back for her tears.
How can you say that? You are always like this, always scolding me with your so-called rational arguments. You've always looked at me with cold eyes. I hate you.
Well, I hate you too. Whether you're in the middle of a divorce or struggling with debt, it has nothing to do with me, so I'm going to hang up now. As I said this, Sophia cried out in panic.
Wait, I'm sorry for saying I hate you. Please, we're the only siblings we have. Help me out here. Give me back the alimony, please.
What? Give back the alimony? There's no way I'd do that. There's nothing I can do for you. Irritated, I responded,
That's not true. You can give me money, right? Please, $30,000. No, even $20,000 is okay. Just give me some money, please.
I'm sorry, but I say no. Maybe you should ask Bob. Bye. With that, I hung up the phone. Later, I learned that Dad's estate included stocks, which had crashed, further increasing the outstanding debt amount. Sophia kept calling me, so I set her number to be blocked. Months later, James and I were still living peacefully, and I had completely forgotten about Sophia and Bob. Out of curiosity about what had happened to them since, I decided to hire a private investigator. The investigation revealed that Sophia and Bob's divorce had been finalized. After the divorce, Sophia was juggling nightclub and day jobs, just managing to make ends meet with her debt payments. However, even in the area with many nightclubs, the aging yet still beautiful Sophia struggled to attract clients. The men who used to support her financially had all left her once they found out about her enormous debt. Desperate, Sophia clung to these men, which led one of them, feeling threatened, to confess his affair with her to his wife. Most of the men supporting Sophia were significantly older and married. The wife, upon learning of her husband's infidelity, filed for damages against Sophia, further increasing her debt. An acquaintance of mine happened to see Sophia in a cheap dress on a cold night in the city.
Hey, mister, won't you come have a drink?
She was calling out to all the men, but due to her haggard appearance from stress, none gave her a second glance. Eventually, she was too persistent with a businessman.
Hey, old lady, you're too persistent.
He snapped at her. The man she harassed was quickly approached by a younger, prettier woman and went off with her into a bar. Sophia watched this and broke down crying. Even hearing this from my acquaintance, I felt no sympathy for Sophia. It's all her fault. On the other hand, after divorcing Sophia, Bob apparently got involved with another bad woman and ended up saddled with a huge debt that he couldn't escape. He started working a side job to pay off the debts. But since his main job prohibited secondary employment, he was fired when it was discovered. Now he's considering bankruptcy. Reading the investigator's report, I smiled at the fitting end for such a despicable man. In contrast, James and I continue to live a peaceful life. We recently got a dog, making us a happy family of 3. My work is going well, and I've just been promoted. Work and home life are thriving, and I'm enjoying my days happily.